Okay, I think we're good to go live here. Trying to get started here just a couple minutes early, as we usually do when we're doing the We the Govern live stream here. And one of the things, the topic that we're going to have for today's live stream is all about catching thieves in government. There's so many to uncover. You have to get started somewhere, and it's important to do that. So one of the quick things that we'll do, just as we kind of jump into this real quick here, I do try to let people know when I'm going to be coming out there and speaking in your community. So I'll go through the next 3 Doge training classes that are coming up over the next month, and we can talk about some of the other basic overview topics before we kind of jump into today's live stream. It isn't Ask Me Anything, which means that when there's a question, I'll be doing my best to answer that question, and it will be linked down below like you see here. And it makes it a little bit easier for me to spot it, because a lot of times there's a lot of commentary that starts to go on back and forth, which is totally fine. But if you actually have a question for me, that's what I'm trying to do, is answer your questions. Try to hit the @ We the Govern, just so that I can spot it in the... Usually what happens is you get a long list of commentary going back and forth, and so it's just a little bit easier for me to be able to pick it out if you actually do something like that down below, and it's just easier for me to see it. So that's what I'll try to do. Just a real quick then update on a couple of the Doge training classes. If I saw you, by the way, last night in Enumclaw, it was good to meet you. There were a lot of new people there, and some people that I hadn't seen for quite a while. So some old friends, but a lot of new people as well, and that was really good to see. And I actually am wearing the Griffin Brewery t-shirt that they gave me. They were the ones who helpfully hosted the Doge training class last night. So whether it's a church or a bar or a pub or a brewery or even a college campus, possibly, as we've done one on a college campus so far. Wherever it is, we're happy to do a Doge training class where you live as well, if you can organize enough people to get together and help us find people in your community who are interested in trying to hold government accountable. There's no such thing as too much transparency in government for the most part, and not to say that you're going to be super happy with what you find, but it doesn't matter. It's still worth exposing it and getting it out there anyway. The next 3 Doge training classes I have, there's one coming up on the 26th, which is Thursday of this week, out in Kitsap County. I believe that's in Silverdale. And that's on the website, We the Govern website. You'll see the Doge training classes listed there. And so the one on the 26th, June 26th here, is in Kitsap County. Then I have one in Lewis County on July 14th. I kind of skipped over the couple weeks in between just because of the July 4th holidays. And I could add one in maybe the week before the July 14th week. But right now I'm scheduled to do one on July 14th, which is a Monday, and then up in Clown County, which is July 17th. And if you were up in Clown County at the Lincoln Day Dinner on Saturday, it was good to see everybody up there. And I know I made an announcement about the Doge training class coming up there in Squim, and I believe that one's at the Lions Club as well. So lots of good stuff. The Lewis County Doge training class on July 14th. That's a Monday. That's going to be at the Foursquare Church down in Chehalis. So anyway, lots of opportunities to get some of this training if you live locally. If you live anywhere else in the state, please just reach out to me. I'm happy to schedule training classes, but like I said, just make sure that you have a good location. We have to nail down a date and that you have enough people there to make it worthwhile. And I would say anything, you need to at least be able to organize 30 or so people. Just it makes it a little more interesting for them, and it makes it worthwhile to spend that day doing training there versus another place that might have more people somewhere else. So that's all I have coming up. I do have some speaking engagements and other activities that have been set up more later on in the summer, but it's a little further down the road, and we don't need to go into any of those scheduled events next. But if you are interested in seeing me and visiting with me, those 3 Doge training classes are a pretty good opportunity to do so, and they're coming up before too long. I did do a video today, kind of an update video actually on 3 different things. One of them had to do with the PDC complaint, Public Disclosure Commission complaint that I had filed against the mayor of Cedar Woolley. Relatively typical type of violation that I do find with a lot of elected officials. You just have to dig in and find out if they're concealing information off their financial affairs documents, which they seem to do on a regular basis. So in that case, she was concealing concealing the fact that the Cedar Woolley gave her husband's business, weirdly enough, named Tight Lies LLC. Not totally sure why you would call a company Tight Lies versus Loose Lies or some other name, but that was the name of her husband's company. And while she was on the city council as mayor, they happened to kick in about almost $10,000 over to him, which doesn't absolutely make it illegal, but it is a bit unethical if you're not reporting that and disclosing the truth to the public so that they know. So it's just much better if they actually follow the law. She did not, and so I filed that complaint against her, and oddly enough, it made it in the Cascadia Daily. To their credit, that newspaper, which is definitely hard left most of the time, they actually did try to reach out to me and talk to me, but I didn't get the message from the gal writing the article in time, so I wasn't able to get back in touch with her, but they wrote an article, and anyway, I referenced that complaint and how you go about finding complaint violations like that so you can file complaints like that yourself. So I do think it's kind of worthwhile just to document some of that stuff. I also went into another story that had come up forwarded to me just before this last Doge training class, which had to do with meddling. I guess it was over the weekend that I got this, but it was meddling, a town of Meddling up in Ponderay, where the town clerk was put on suspended leave pending a fraud investigation into missing funds in that city or that town. It's a small little town, but what's always amazing to me when you look at some of the corruption in these cases, and that's probably the core element to this kind of conversation, is that there's a lot more of this going on out there than most people realize. There's a lot more corruption that you can go out and find if you bother to look. And the point, I think, sometimes that I try to emphasize a little bit is that nobody's looking. People think that the state auditor's looking, but that's really rarely true. They do audits, and I'll put they do audits of jurisdictions, but it's not an audit the way that if you've ever experienced it in the private sector. The audits that they do are actually far less significant, and they aren't really around auditing anything. They're just around kind of cycling through a list of jurisdictions that they have to get through that month and pre-negotiating ahead of time the very limited areas that they're going to bother to look at when they come out to that jurisdiction, so that if there is somebody there who's dishonest and corrupt, they know to keep their corruption usually somewhere else, so that while the auditors are out there, they don't easily stumble on it by accident. And so one of the challenges, of course, is that you create this false sense of security with the public, thinking that there's actually watchdogs or people who are paying attention, and the truth is that they really aren't, and they aren't really going out there finding things. It's not that they can't accidentally stumble on somebody stealing money. I think it's so common that the dumb ones get caught, and so that's why you have these stories that come out, because somebody's gotten sloppy and they've managed to steal in such an obvious and overt way that becomes very public and difficult to conceal, even from the state auditor's office. Now, that doesn't mean that they do have a good division there, the state auditor's office, their fraud investigation department. When they bring that little subdivision in, they're actually quite good. But in order to trigger their investigation, the auditors or a whistleblower or somebody has to actually bring enough information to them to actually convince them that it's worthwhile to go down here and look at an audit. And so that's why all fraud in Washington state, for the most part, generally passes most state audits for a long time before anybody gets caught, sometimes for decades. And so it's one of the challenges that we have structurally. If you have a situation where people think that the gold star that says the auditor's office has come out here and looked at your budget, it means nothing. The only question is how could you actually be dumb enough to get caught stealing the money or misusing funds? That's usually the bigger question when they do suddenly have a report out about somebody stealing money somewhere. So I do think it's kind of important just to draw that attention to people so that they understand how the state auditor auditor's office and an auditing function actually works. There are lots of opportunities, and so I think that it's going to be important to pay attention to what's actually going on in your local government. And the Doge Training class that I had last night was to mostly a bunch of King County activists out there. That is like fertile ground for finding all kinds of problems in Kent or in Renton or in Tukwila or SeaTac or Berrien or Federal Way. King County, good Lord, Seattle. There's all kinds of opportunities you're going to have out there. Issaquah, Redmond, anywhere you look, you'll find problems. Even if you have good elected officials there, sometimes they're not aware of what the bureaucrats are doing because the bureaucrats, in most cases, tend to find ways of isolating elected officials from the day-to-day activities that are going on inside the jurisdiction. I don't usually find the politicians actively involved in open corruption, usually more ethical violations of other kinds. Most of the actual thievery or genuine theft or the really open and outright corruption and fraud tends to be done and committed by people who actually work in local government of some capacity or another. It could go up as high as a manager. It could be a department head. Could be Dennis Hauge, like Dennis Houston, out of Franklin County when he stole we figure about $3.6 million in the end, although he was convicted and went to federal court for $2.7 million that he stole over 22 years out of the Public Works Department there, where he was the finance director. But those are the kind of people that have access and they know what they're doing. The meddling city clerk, or town clerk, I should say, was probably involved in tracking expenses and expenditures, and so she had the ability to make all that money disappear, which is probably why she's on paid, or I don't know if she's on paid leave, but she's definitely suspended, and that usually isn't a good sign when there's a fraud investigation going on and it was your job to manage the money. Just in case you aren't aware of that, that usually is a pretty good sign. You better lawyer up and be prepared for something that's going to be a little bit more significant moving forward. So there are lots of opportunities out there. The unfortunate truth is that nobody's looking, and so if you and I and other citizens get involved and actually choose to look, then we're far more likely to uncover the truth where we live or in neighboring communities near us. And that gives us the ability to expose the truth, which generally will lead to some type of investigation or at least potential changing of the ways when you catch people doing bad things. So let's jump into a couple of questions. I realize we're kind of just getting started here, but there are a couple of questions that have already popped up, and I'm going to try to get on top of this because if I don't do it right away, they do tend to pile up, and then I don't get on top of it quick enough. So let's look at the question right here, which is, with summer heat coming, do you think Ferguson, and this is from Michael Case, do you think Ferguson will allow power companies to do rolling blackouts like in California? Well, historically, in the Pacific Northwest, we really haven't had the issue of rolling blackouts mostly, and I think the system's still strong enough in Washington State, even with the growth that we've had. I don't think rolling blackouts are very likely in Washington State, mainly because of the hydro reliance that the power grid does have here. And during the summer, we do have some solar panel, programs set up here. We have one nuclear plant over in Richland that recently, this week actually, was taken offline for a while to do some maintenance and some work on it. But most of our power, over 60% of it or so, comes from hydro. And so the water still falls, gravity still exists even in Washington State. And so the fact is, as a baseload power supply, that's a pretty good program. And it was really good that the Trump administration came in and kind of shut down the scam that the enviros were trying to run and taking down some of those Snake River dams. The stupidity of that program and that idea, the idea that you can take out the dams and that you'll improve anything of any substance, is proven to be just a complete and total lie. Anybody that's looked at what's happened in the Klamath Valley down in California and Oregon, where they took out the dams there and destroyed agriculture and communities for no reason, killed the entire fish population in the river for no good reason, destroyed the ability to generate the power down there for no good reason, and now they do have rolling blackouts for no good reason. But those environmental groups, they got a lot of millions of dollars, and I'm sure they're proud of themselves for the destruction that they've left in their wake. But We don't have to go down that road, and right now, at least, the federal government is going to oppose any kind of potential removal of the Snake River dams. And if anything, Washington State could use probably some more hydropower in a few different places. There's a lot of benefits from putting in dams, and we're quite effective if we choose to do it at finding ways of having fish ladders or something to address the issue related to habitat for fish. But they give other benefits. In addition to power production, which is one of the benefits that you get from dams, you also have the ability to mitigate flood control. And managed flood control is a significant issue. Since most lefties seem to be focused on destroying history as soon as they can, there's an effort, apparently, to ignore the fact that, especially along the Columbia, the Kent Valley, and all these other places in Washington State, before they put the dams up, massive flooding was a common occurrence over time. I mean, my grandfather told me stories about the Kent Valley when he was a little kid, getting flooded wall to wall, valley wall. Imagine the entire Kent Valley, Renton, Auburn, Kent, everything completely underwater by 10 feet of water. That's substantial, much more substantial than any theoretical 150-year, 1-inch rise of sea level by climate change models. And that flooding was pretty destructive. In fact, the last time where the big floods really swept through the valley there, that's what motivated the people who lived in Washington State at the time to go up and dam the Cedar River and the Green River and put in the hydro dams they have up there, and also do a lot of the main water work. In fact, one of the reasons why the Cedar River goes in, it didn't used to flow into Lake Washington, but the reason why it's so straight there in Renton is they actually channeled that out and ran into Lake Washington as well. So there's a lot of changes that occurred because of the massive flooding that occurred in the valley back then. And so you've improved the situation by reducing this mass destructive, unpredictable, harmful flooding. On top of that, in eastern Washington in particular, this is less significant in western Washington because of the rainfall that we have, but in eastern Washington, the irrigation system set up with the all over eastern Washington and a lot of the communities over there, the irrigation systems in the Yakima area in particular, and in other farming areas today in parts of the state that wouldn't have really been able to support the type of farming and agricultural production that Washington State enjoys today. They're supported because of the fact that we have this massive dam system, and that by sending all that water everywhere, they're able to support a much higher volume of crop yields on land that otherwise would have been too dry to raise any of the wheat crops, or the irrigation they do for some of the orchards, and any of the row crops that they grow in eastern Washington quite well right now. And even though most of the people in Seattle probably don't realize that where plants come from or where their food comes from, the reality is that Washington State is a substantial producer of a wide variety of agricultural products, and the dams are a key part of that, especially in eastern Washington. It also allowed for better transportation of farm products down the Columbia River in particular. So it allowed them to do large volume movement where you're able to use barges and the locks on the dams to actually move huge amounts of agricultural products. And to some extent other things like timber and stuff, but mostly the agricultural products is really what most people will notice. And the ability to move that large volume pretty economically on these big barges down the Columbia River, and by maintaining a level in the Columbia River that the dams end up maintaining kind of year-round and controlling, it gives them the ability to move all of that. I mean, this is a pretty beneficial advancement in modern humanity, and it's really important for Washington State. And so at this point in time, we still have enough hydropower. We're probably one of the most stable sources. I believe we're still the only state left in America that the majority of the power that we get comes from hydropower. And so a lot of it does some goes to Idaho, some goes down to as far as Utah, some goes down to, and Oregon gets some as well, a little bit less now. But hydro is significant, and it's a great baseload water power supply, and then it comes with all the other benefits. And so the fact that the enviros and the lefties have decided that that's what they're going to target and destroy, that's simply about making life as miserable as possible and destroying a solid power grid and destroying agriculture and destroying lots of people with flooding that would be uncontrolled and unchecked. Somebody mentioned in here that I saw it come up here. Sorry. There was some mention in here about mitigation didn't exist when the dams were built. Yeah, the concept of mitigation, but the idea of reducing the flooding was quite a big deal. In the 1940s, there's pictures you can see of Portland being flooded by the Columbia. I mean, tremendously significant flooding and really destructive flooding that occurred there. And so the motivation to put more dams and to actually control the Columbia River, which is a massive river, and the Snake River, to control them with dams, it was really a significant investment of previous generations in Washington State that's paid off for multiple generations down long past the time that the people who did it, that they passed away. We get the benefits of their labors and their work that they've had in the past. And one of those benefits appears to be right now the fact that we don't have rolling blackouts in Washington State because we have hydropower. Now, it didn't help that they've gone after the Trans-Alta coal-fired power plant down in Centralia. I think that was a foolish choice. It would be okay if they've convert that to a natural gas facility, but the taking out key baseload power plants like that is a disaster for our state long-term if they continue to do it. Now, right now, the feds do seem to have intervened, so that's been stopped. And there also seems to be some recognition because probably the data center requirements and the people who are really into electric cars, they're starting to realize that that actually does require electricity, and that electricity doesn't just somehow fall out of the sky and land in their lap, but it actually takes some work to produce it somewhere. And so you might not be able to convince an Evergreen State College student of that, or certainly not a professor that goes there, but the rest of the people who are more literate and aware of the real world, you're going to be able to recognize that. And I think there is some recognition, which is why they're going back and revisiting the idea of nuclear power again, which would have been certainly better if we had not had the whoops debacle back in the 80s, where the nuclear power plants out in Washington State happens to be a good location for some of these. So with the large water supply that we do have in many places. And so probably it would be much wiser for us to go with kind of a hydro-nuclear structure of power production in our state. But we will see as time goes by. We do live in a better place than California, or at this point in time, anywhere in the Northeast, as you see Maryland pretty much having blackouts, in New York also having some blackouts, and states like Pennsylvania having to provide them the power from those states. Fortunately, we're one of those net power producer states, and that's very beneficial, I think. Let's see. Somebody says needs to be arrested. Deneen, I don't know if you're referring to me or somebody else that needs to be arrested, but maybe you can turn that into a question and I will do my best to answer it. Jason Fisher, hey Glenn, looking forward to our conversation. Pretty chaotic week for MAGA. Can't say I agree with Trump on Iran, and I am one of his biggest supporters. Your thoughts? This is an interesting dilemma, or dilemma is the wrong term. This is an interesting, it's a international affairs question, of course, and I confess that I'm pretty opposed to nation building. I think it's a bad use of our resources, energy, and time, and it's also an unrealistic attempt to project what you believe your value system is on countries that probably will never share your value system. You cannot go over to a country in a different sort of place in the world and tell them overnight that this is the type of government that they need to have. You're just not going to have that happen very easily, and you can't impose, and at least have not seen it work too well in the past, you can't impose a government on them against their will. They're going to resist it and undermine it, and it's just not going to work. Afghanistan's never going to be a Republican or Democratic form of government out there. At least it won't for generations. It has to be homegrown. You can grow and convince a society, perhaps, that maybe they don't have to destroy themselves all the time, and they can become a productive society if they choose to do so. But you can't force them to do that. And it was one of the supreme delusions, I think, of the Bush administration after 9/11 in fundamentally going down a road that I don't think was realistic at all, and thinking that you could impose that an American style of governance in countries that have never really experienced it, didn't support it, and didn't want it imposed on them. You have to allow those countries to find their own way. And so as a public policy standpoint, I certainly wouldn't want to be squandering our resources or blood and treasure or anything else in these other countries if you're not going to get those results. Now, listen, sometimes if you are attacked by bad guys, then you have to go out and take them out. I just don't think sitting in Afghanistan for 20 some odd years was a good use of time. Taking out the Taliban was probably a good use of energy and time. Going over there and trying to rebuild their country is a task that's unrealistic. One of the challenges, of course, is that as a nation, our country had, after World War II, we essentially helped both Germany and Japan become very powerful countries later with a substantial investment of, and here we had fought horrific wars against both those countries. And at the same time, we were able to then afterwards build them back up so that they're, in fact, probably some of our closest friends and allies in the world today. And certainly functional and positive relationships with those countries. And so that kind of, I think, created this unrealistic expectation that you could just do that with any country, and that's just not true. In both Japan and Germany's case, you had a long history of advanced, educated sort of aspiration for a more advanced society, and representative forms of government were very achievable there. And so, but you're not going to go and then just suddenly impose that on countries that don't have that, and they're going to resent you. So it just seems unrealistic. In Iran, the conflict between Iran and Israel was probably inevitable at some point in time. If I was in Israel's shoes, I'd probably want to take out their military and their ability to threaten my country as well. Israel's in a tough neighborhood over there, so they have to do that with a lot of people, and they seem to have been fairly successful, actually, since the October 7th attack by Hamas. Israel seems to have been able to regain some credibility and some deterrence capacity with their fighting. But remember, that's been going on now since the late 40s there, and even earlier, depending on how you look at some of the history of modern Israel. The question, of course, when it came to Iran is, at what point does America engage and involve? And as much as I don't want to intervene, there are probably times, if you can stop the nuclear, it's always been a really concerning threat with Iran, that they could develop a nuclear weapon. And, if you brainwash 4 generations of a country into chanting death to America and death to Israel every single day of their lives forever, and people I've talked to that grew up in Iran tell me that they literally do that all the time, every single time. It's one of their, it's like saying the Pledge of Allegiance in America. And at some point in time, and a country like that gets nuclear weapons, they certainly don't need it for power, and they decide they're going to use those nuclear weapons on us, especially with the type of regime that runs that country. That's a concern. So probably destroying that capacity would have been something that they should have done years ago. And but of course, the problem ends up landing in your lap. I was greatly against the nuclear agreement that was signed under the Obama administration, where they sent massive amounts. I thought it was billions of dollars in cargo planes filled with cash, and delivering that to the mullahs under the Obama administration, and then a similar version when you had well, of course, Biden wasn't really in charge, but whoever was actually running the Biden administration when he was in there. And that type of encouragement, sending that money to horrific countries like that, and then expecting there won't be consequences down the road for your own country is pretty delusional. And unfortunately, they have a lot of delusional people working in government and think that's a good idea. And so I'm not sure how much corruption was involved in those cases on our side, but inevitably that tends to play a role there as well. At this point in time, we have to see if this peace ceasefire kind of holds, and hopefully there's more peaceful environment moving forward. I would never send troops into Iran, pretty much under any circumstances. If you have to and you have to do something, then maybe that we just have to. Maybe sometimes bombing those nuclear sites is a better option than letting them get a nuclear weapon and then get it deployed to your country. So we'll see. Anyway, I don't know that I even answered that, but I mean, I think that's as a big story of the day. Listen, we could be in a lot worse situation right now. We'll see if the ceasefire holds. I hope it does. I hope that maybe the Iranian government, whatever's left of it, that they decide that perhaps not going to war with everybody around you and sponsoring terrorism all over the world, maybe that's not a good plan for them. Perhaps maybe even just giving your own country the opportunity to economically grow and prosper in a world in which you're not threatening to kill everybody around you. That might be a good plan. I don't know, but maybe they could try it and see how that works. But we'll see. They do have oil, and they have the ability to have a pretty wealthy society there if they choose to do that. And but as far as how it applies to America, I don't want to get into a big conflict over there if we can avoid it. This is Jack. I saw this point down below, and I think I mentioned it earlier, about mitigation not being a thing when the Columbia dams were built. And of course, you're referring to the concept that is oftentimes squandering a large volume of our transportation dollars, which is the theoretical models of mitigation scams that are run in almost every road now built in Washington State, where enviro groups come in and argue that putting in an extra lane on 405 means you have to have lots of mitigation somewhere else. And so this money, it's like this funny money, and they spread it around and they throw that money at projects, and essentially it acts like a bribery sort of scheme when you just have to simply expand the road. One of the challenges with transportation projects generally is that in Washington State, you look back in the Rossellini administration, which was back in the 60s, and I believe he was a Democrat, when they were building the 520 bridge and the I-90 bridge originally, and 405, and a number of the roads that you see today all around Washington State, the main freeway systems, soft costs, which were anything that wasn't related to a direct cost, boots on the ground, putting rock, putting concrete down to build a road, anything that wasn't directly achieving that was about 5% of the cost of the transportation project back then. Today, it's about 30% of the cost, just squandered on waste and inefficiency and overhead and all kinds of other expensive, pointless expenditures that do nothing to reduce congestion or expand the transportation system in Washington State. It's just money wasted to insiders and grifting class that's involved in that process. And so we spend a ridiculous amount of money on roads and bridges that we would have a lot more roads and bridges today if we didn't spend such a large percentage of that money on stuff that goes nowhere. Worse than that, of course, is the Sound Transit scam, which is the best way to waste billions of dollars and get the least amount of value that modern man seems to be able to create in these sort of situations. And let's see. This is a comment, actually, Jack, and I like it kind of, and so I'm going to bring it up anyway, even though it's not a question here. We are man. We have the power to make life better, but it does come at a cost to other things, and it does. But I think dams and hydropower in Washington State makes a lot of sense, and I certainly would encourage, when you're investing in infrastructure, this is a super beneficial type of infrastructure. There's some basic things the government needs to do and should encourage. They don't need to get in the middle of it as much as they need to be able to make it more efficient. You want to have a society in which power is as inexpensive as you can make it and as plentiful as you can make it, because that provides one of the foundations for almost everything else moving forward. Business, life, getting everything. It's not the only one, though. You also want to make it so that food is very inexpensive. Everybody has to eat, and everybody needs to use power at some point in time. And so providing those things at the lowest cost and removing as much of the friction and the problems that would increase the cost for no benefit it should be a priority. Transportation is the other thing. I mean, these were recognized. Power wasn't recognized, but food and transportation were recognized by the founding fathers when they created our country, and they recognized that they were very important. Now, back then, they were building canals more frequently as public works projects so that they could move goods and services and people over long distances at relatively low cost. It made the country more connected. It made the economy much stronger, and it provided a lot of foundational benefits for everybody moving forward. Outside of that, if you protect property rights quite well, and you have good controls and strict controls on protecting property rights, and you follow the constitutional protections that are outlined fairly well in both the state and the federal constitution, then you can create this foundation where people will actually produce a very healthy, vibrant, and growing society. When you start to infringe on that with all kinds of dreams and schemes and grant grifting schemes, then you're going to build up a substantial amount of friction and cost and waste that begins to erode the ability of people to get ahead. And initially, you're eroding people on the margins at lower incomes, maybe, where that small increase in power gets them kicked out of their house or prevents them from starting a business or prevents them from being able to commute to work or whatever it is. Prevents them from eating nutritiously because you've increased the cost of the food. Whatever it is that you've started to impact, the more and more you keep throwing on these overhead costs and bureaucratic waste and administrative state abuses and building up that friction and waste, then you start to hit a larger percentage of the population. Now, leftists and socialists don't mind that because they like those people to be dependent on government, and so they prefer to make as many people poor as they can so that they depend upon the largesse of government program, and that's one way of controlling people. And socialists absolutely love, the left generally loves to control people, and so that's a tool for controlling people. The more you can pull government out of individual lives and the cost burden that hits us everywhere, then the less government has the ability to control you, so you're more free, but the healthier and wealthier and better the society is. It doesn't make it utopia, it just makes it a much better place to live. And this is where my big conflict with socialism has and always will be. So, and we see it all the time when we drive around Seattle and other places, and we look at the benefits of, free needles and whatever other freebies that they're giving away to attract as many drug addicts to Seattle as they possibly can create. Question, you've been to downtown Portland, Seattle recently. Went to Portland, or you're asking me if I did, but you went to Portland, had my head on a swivel, I'm assuming. Never moved my head so much. My neighbor said soccer stadium's been taken over by tents. I have been downtown Seattle a couple times recently. Haven't been downtown Portland in probably a couple years. So I've missed the downtown Portland decay, but I'm sure I'll be suitably shocked the next time I go down there. And we'll see what it looks like. But it's always a good idea to have your head on a swivel no matter what. Even if you're in a small town or out in the woods, keep your head on a swivel. It's a good plan and it's a good habit to be in. Jack Palder, do you think Israel has shown its true colors about how it really feels about the U.S.? Nutty Yahoo has got to go, in my humble opinion. Israel has shown its true colors. Well, I mean, listen, if you're in Israel, you're going to want the U.S. to bomb your enemies just like you'd want anybody else to bomb them. But most countries have a fairly predictable perspective on what they need to do to protect themselves. And the one benefit, I think, of organizing people by nation states is just that it becomes fairly predictable what they need. And so the world's a better place if you can cooperate and live in harmony with your neighbors, but that's a utopian scheme that has never existed in human history. So inevitably, conflict's always going to be there. And it doesn't matter if you can go back, that we do mythologize the tribal world that existed in America before the traditional European settlers came here, and we mythologize it because we try to create this theoretical utopia that existed where these tribes all got along. And it wasn't true at all. I mean, even if you look at some of the original stories of people who came to the Pacific Northwest, which was one of the probably least conflict-prone areas, mostly because of the benefit of the environment here. It was so mellow, especially on the west side, the wet side of Washington. Food was abundant, and you didn't have to actually go and attack your neighbors, but they still did anyway. They just didn't do it quite as rapaciously as you saw in the East Coast or in the, with some of the tribes in the Midwest and in the Southwest as settlers kind of came across the country. However, even here, I mean, one of the things to remember is that there was a lot of concern with early settlers. If you go back and you look at early journals and newspaper articles and things they wrote about, even in the Pacific Northwest, they had a lot of concerns. They had to really step in and tell the tribes not to massacre each other, especially once they got firearms, and they might have had the tribe they've always hated for generations, and this is their opportunity to exterminate them all. There were massive massacres that did occur back then. In Brennan, Washington, there was a big massacre where there was only one tribe member left. I can't remember if it's a Brennan tribe or if it's something else. I don't remember which tribe exterminated him. You had the same thing happen up in Whidbey Island. There was a massive massacre that occurred up there. And one of the things that the settlers had to step in is tell and intervene with the tribes and tell them they can't just exterminate each other willy-nilly anymore. We also had to step in and stop them from having slaves. Chief Seattle had 6 slaves, and we had to step in and tell Chief Seattle that you're going to have to set your slaves free, especially knowing the history of Washington State, which was adamantly a free state, virulently opposed to slavery and very Republican in its early days. And so they were very much focused on convincing the tribes to stop killing each other and to stop imposing slavery. And so even though it's vogue now to pretend like there was some kind of utopian world that existed here when the tribes were here just living all by their lonesome out in the Pacific Northwest, that of course is not true and dishonest, and it's not a good representation of history. Never has been anywhere in any cultural history that you've ever found. Doesn't matter if it's South America or Europe or Asia, there's always been conflict. What's amazing is how little conflict you have in the modern world in comparison to the massive conflict that existed in the past. And so I do think that that's a product of both the Judeo-Christian values generically over time, not because that everybody's perfect, but still there were ideas that began to percolate that started to allow for this development of more peaceful relations with the rest of the world. We will see. Let's see. Here's a question. NinjaBot, should we do merch hats like MWGA, Make Washington Great Again? You absolutely could. There was somebody that gave me, he was a Japanese immigrant to Washington State, lives down in Renton, and I'm sorry, I apologize if you're watching right now, I don't remember your name, but he made an awesome hat that said just that, and I got it at one of my Doge Training classes up in Marysville, so I got to go back and find that hat. I should bring that in here. So people have already done that, and you're certainly free and welcome to do it as well. Let's jump in. Thunder Designer, this is a common, you keep changing your name here though when you're throwing these questions at me. Hi Glenn, I'm back. It's Thunder Striker here. There we go. What do you think is their next move for Iran, and do you believe they might attack the U.S.? And could this potentially lead to World War III? Well, everybody thinks everything's going to lead to World War III eventually at some point in time. And the challenge, of course, as always, is adjusting your doom and gloom mindset and the tendency to be very skeptical about human nature, and the tendency to believe that bad actors will, of course, take advantage of soft and weak players to engage in a negative way in the political world, especially in the international sort of conflict world. But I'm not sure at this point in time, in the condition that Iran is in right this minute, that attacking the U.S. would be a wise move. It's very possible that there's animosity built up there, certainly among whatever's left of the political leadership, that they could decide to attack the U.S. for sure. And whether that would lead to a major conflict down the road, I would think that it would. I mean, remember, Iran was the one who was heavily involved in the attack on the Marine barracks in 1983 in Lebanon. They were involved, of course, if you talk to veterans in Iraq, and not so much in Afghanistan, but in Iraq, you talk to some of them about the Iranian special forces coming over there and using proxies in Iraq to kill American soldiers. That did happen. But the question is, how would they want to attack us? And one of the concerns that's been out there, of course, has been the Hotel Mumbai kind of method of attack, having sleeper cells in America. And actually, I think that this is a true concern. I mean, if you're going to try to have public policy that does anything, you want to reduce the amount of saboteurs or possible groups of people that could organize, especially those that potentially are sponsored by state actors, to go out and do bad things in our country, because it would be fairly easy for them to do that. And I would be surprised if a number of these countries like China and like possibly North Korea and Iran and others, that they haven't smuggled people across the border or in through immigration one way or another, and they could exist here as a potential outlier and somebody who could actually do bad things to us, whether that's attacking our power grid, whether it's doing Hotel Mumbai sort of terrorism attacks, attacking schools, or taking down the food supply, or whatever, other nefarious things. You're kind of limited just simply by whatever their choices would be. We have a lot of soft targets in the country, and I'm not sure that we've done a good job. I know we haven't done a good job tracking them. And so it doesn't help when you bring 10 million undocumented, totally, you're not even aware of who some of these people are that have come across the border. And so that's where your big problems can potentially come from. But the longer the time goes by where nothing happens, then usually the less concerned people tend to get about these issues. I'm also sort of aware that, I remember I was in New York City when the World Trade Center was bombed the first time. And I remember, and they took a van and they bombed it, and I was actually driving across George Washington Bridge. I was going to a track meet, if I remember right, a track or a cross-country meet. I can't remember what the day was, but we were heading across, and one of the guys jumped up because back then they had a Walkman. He was listening to the radio, and he said, the World Trade Center's been bombed, and you could look across the river, and you could see the World Trade Center, even from the George Washington Bridge. And I remember we all looked at him, we were laughing at him and making fun of him. And then when we got to the hotel and saw the TV news, sure enough, it had been bombed. And I had a friend from school that was actually working in one of the upper floors, and they had to come down the stairs and through the smoke. And I remember some of the articles and stuff that were written about that at the time, about here these terrorists decided that they wanted to take down the World Trade Center, and they partially got caught because they went back to get a refund or something at the U-Haul, get a receipt. It was some weird thing that, some dumb amateur thing that they did, and that helped them get caught, and then they rolled up the group that was involved in that at the time. And one of the challenges that some of these organizations had in bringing people to America to become terrorists or sleeper cells is that the longer you stay here, it required a high level of fanatic devotion to the cause to decide you're going to still be the person to do damage if you've been here for 10 years and you've been corrupted by the soft lifestyle living in America or some other places. Now, it's not a guarantee, of course, and that's a terrible thing to rely on, but it is a challenge, I think, that some of these organizations have in bringing a bunch of people here that they think that they've put in their sleeper cells and then hoping that they're going to go and attack the infrastructure in America. It's a concern, and I think people should be aware of it, but I just don't know how likely it is. With Iran, I would say it's far more likely. If we were in the middle of bombing them back and forth, I would say it's very likely at some point in time for them to pull the trigger on whatever they have set up as a potential here as a backup plan. But since it didn't happen yet, I don't know what kind of time delay you're hoping to have on something like that. And I don't know if you were Iran and you convinced America and Israel stop bombing you suddenly. Maybe you wanted to get a breather before you decide to go and fight jihad again a little bit longer with the evil Satan and the small Satan. So we'll see what happens. Ultimately, that's up to Iran. I'm generally not a fan of regime change in international affairs. I think that's a bad idea. Again, because the unintended consequences, it doesn't seem like it's worked out that well in places like Libya or Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan. Not saying that the previous people that were in there were any good. Even if you do take them out, I don't think being actively boots on the ground especially, but heavily engaged in trying to manipulate the results is a very positive thing to do internationally. I think it's best to be as hands-off as you can be. Let's see. Jason, glad that my explanation might have made a little bit of a difference or some sense. I don't know if it did, but we'll see. Wolf Lord, thank you for all you do, Glenn from San Juan County. And I was just up in San Juan County doing a Doge training class up in Friday Harbor last week. So hopefully you were there at that one. And if you weren't, I guess we'll have to do another one sometime. Question here from Hersh Baker. How do you feel about the job Bob Ferguson saying that Washington's facing a new fiscal shortfall with revenues down $720 million over 4 years, even after passing the largest tax increase? Well, Listen, the Democrats in Washington state in particular are exceptionally delusional, especially when it comes to math. I mean, there's a clear and obvious reality here that they have denied that math exists or that human nature is what it is. And so they seem to believe that the completely fake information that's put out by the accounting department saying that they're going to get X amount of dollars in the taxes, they always, almost without fail, predict numbers that are accurate because they aren't predicting how many people are going to start to enter into tax avoidance. And tax avoidance is not illegal. Tax avoidance is changing your behavior so you're not exposed to that tax. Some people will move. If you're Jeff Bezos and you're a big billionaire person like him, and you can just simply change your domicile and claim to live in Florida to pretend like you're going to be next to your mom, and then suddenly rediscover that selling your Amazon stock is useful to do at that point in time, conveniently now that you don't have to pay any kind of excise tax on it because Washington state stupidly decided to go with a capital gains tax, then that's what you're going to do, and wealthy people will do that. Others will decide maybe I'm going to locate my business in another state, or I'm going to start to do things differently, and that reduces the taxes. So for every dumb tax that Democrats have, there's always some changing behavior that occurs that reduces the projection of the tax income that they think they're going to get from it. And this is the situation that we're in right now. And Bob Ferguson is a guy who's never held a real job in his life, ever, not once. And so people who are caught up in government that long with no even the faintest relationship to reality and the real world for real people. And you're surrounded entirely by sycophants and people who are grifters and have lived their entire life absorbing the life energy and taxes that are simply provided to them by the people who live in Washington state or anywhere else. Then you'll never know reality, and reality will always hit you in the face all the time. And the fact it was very predictable they were going to have these shortfalls. But again, denying the reality of math is usually a big part of the Democratic equation and their policy platforms in Washington state. Remember, we do at least still have a rainy day fund set up, but again, there's always going to be consequences to stupid and dumb taxes, and also having bloated and wasteful government, which is something that Bob Ferguson, of course, is unwilling to dig into and clean up. And in fact, there's no Democrat that I'm aware of in the state willing to do that. So eventually, the only way you're going to do that is if you do elect Republicans to take over the state. Now, they aren't perfect. Some of them will not be willing to do what they need to do, but the ones that do, that's the only path, the only home for reform in government is going to have to come out of a Republican takeover of some kind in Washington state. And it won't be easy. The NinjaBot, is Washington state able to be fixed with the election reform that J.D. Vance was proposing? And do you think that he will actually go forward with it and thus have an end in sight for us? And there's a couple elements to this question. It's funny because I did partially address one of the elements of this with the executive order that was put out by March 25th by Donald Trump, and it had to do with the Homeland Security releasing the lists as it relates to the Department of Licensing and the amount of non-U.S. citizens that were registered to vote in our state, as well as the illegals that were registered to vote here. And supposedly that deadline, assuming Homeland Security sticks to the 90-day deadline that Trump had, technically that deadline would be tomorrow or perhaps the next couple days. And if they follow that deadline, the question is initially, what do they do with that list? Are they just simply going to the Secretary of State, who's going to probably try to kibosh it and bury it and hide it in their office to pretend like it didn't happen? Or are they just going to make it public, which is what I would advocate that they do, because we can crowdsource that information and get a pretty good sense of exactly how many non-U.S. citizens are both registered to vote, which I think is a pretty big number, and then actually voted, which I think is probably a relatively small number. It just simply highlights there's no checks and controls in place today to do it, despite the lies that have been told to us by the people who were in that office for so long. And so I think that that's a big deal. That starts to open that door to some of the cleanup. We want to remove them from the voter rolls, whether they voted or not, because they shouldn't be on the voter rolls. And secondly, it'll also give us a much more accurate projection and analysis for voter turnout models, all kinds of things. I mean, it really does change things quite a bit. It also starts us down that path as the house of cards collapses in the fake stories that Secretary of State Hobbs came out and said everything's great and perfect and wonderful. It allows, and he knows it's not. I mean, he's flat out aware that it's not. He may not be aware of how bad it is, but he's certainly aware that it's not great. Everybody in his office, every single employee that works around him is fully aware of the fact the Department of Licensing signs up every non-U.S. citizen to vote in Washington State every single time they come to their offices. And not just them, but you also have the people who get DSHS that sign them up. So they're registered to vote no matter what their citizenship status is, which is illegal, and he knows that, and all of his employees certainly know that. I've spoken to them about this. They know it. So now that's going to become exposed one way or another through this Homeland Security release of the data, and as that starts to open up more and more, there's hard decisions that they're going to have to make internally, and part of it's going to be admitting the truth about the craziness that anyway, we'll just have to see how it goes, but it's kind of silly right now. Let's see. Elliot's My Dragon. Do you think Jeffco, I'm assuming you mean Jefferson County, and Squim in particular, changing the salmon runs back to its original way is going to work, and why do they cause such damages to forests and private land? Well, the answer is that neither Jefferson County nor Squim, and you're really talking about Clown County up there, and you're really talking more about the Central Plan Department and the some of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife programs, state programs, I should say, so Washington State Fish and Wildlife programs and some of the enviros there. It's one big grifting operation. The salmon recovery money, they don't care if they save any salmon anywhere. They just like the fact they get paid millions of dollars to pretend to do stuff that's going to help the salmon. Oftentimes, a lot of it doesn't help the salmon at all. But I don't think there's no going back exactly. You know, you can find ways, fish hatcheries, if run well and managed correctly, have the ability to produce a lot of salmon. And you can increase the amount of salmon through fish hatcheries, something that they've only known about for about 70 years now. So this is not a secret, and it's a fairly established history. However, remember, there's motivating money that's involved in making sure that the problem never gets solved. In fact, there's a lot more money in preventing the problem from being solved than there is in actually finding solutions to the problems that you tend to face in society. So there's more money in making sure that you destroy kids' education and make sure they're illiterate and they're totally non-functional in society and they don't believe math is real and they can't write an essay to save their life, because government throws more money at you, not less, after that to try to clean it up and fix it. Just look at Chicago or some of the other places in America where it just tends to get worse. And so bureaucrats, like Thomas Sowell once said, the only way to understand bureaucracy and how it functions is that bureaucrats don't care about the outcome. The only thing they care about is the process. And the process for them is more money and growing. You know, the nature of bureaucracy is to perpetuate itself. And so once you understand the motivations of bureaucracy, you can predict their incompetence and corruption and failures, because they're structurally set up to fail. They are not structurally set up to solve the problems that we supposedly pay them massive amounts of money to solve. They don't care about solving the problem. They do care about making sure that problem never goes away so that they don't lose job security and the grant grifting operations that exist moving forward. This is why the bureaucratic state and the administrative state becomes such a leviathan that is difficult to suppress and change, because I've talked about this before, about the concentrated benefits distributed cost concerns to the people who are extracting the tax dollars, whether it's for fake salmon habitat recovery programs or homeless grifting operations downtown or low-income housing that costs more than any other housing in the entire county, or all kinds of incompetence. I mean, Jefferson County is exceptionally incompetently run by some of the worst people probably put into public office. You look at that Cherry Street low-income housing disaster and debacle that they had there. That was a classic level of just egregious incompetence piled on top of incompetence, and it never ends. And so there's massive amounts of money as long as you don't want to fix a problem. And so I think understanding that, then you know that when somebody like me or others who actually do get kind of wonkish and into the details on some of these projects, the reason why we want less government, the reason why we want smaller government, more limited government, and extract government's invasion of our lives in so many different areas and pulling it back and root and branch removing it in many of these places is because government solves very few of the problems that they claim to actually solve. You have to have government in some capacity in some areas. It can be effective in having a fire suppression program set up in place so you can stop fires, but you can abuse the fire department and turn into a bureaucracy that's incompetent as well, as we saw in California. Law enforcement is necessary to ensure that everybody just doesn't become anarchists and we decide to go get rid of whatever criminals or settle our disputes outside of the court system. So the police serve a necessary function and the jails serve a necessary humane function in solving some of these problems. And so it's a legitimate use of government to run those as well as you possibly can, as efficiently as you can. They can be abused. You can over-militarize your police. You can try to turn your police into social workers and wonder why that doesn't work as well as you think. There's all kinds of ways that you can reform it to make it worse. But at the end of the day, there's just some core key functions. And everything after that, the government doesn't do well. They clearly don't do well educating the public. Public schools have not generated the return that they should. Now, it could be that in public schools are a necessary evil. They're a constitutional requirement in Washington state. But perhaps there would be less reliance on them, or they would improve in quality if we removed a lot of the restrictions and structures that exist right now to ensure that they have low quality and high cost as outcome options. So, and that you make it easier for alternatives to pop up. The most important thing is to have the ability to educate and truly educate people in society. That's very helpful. And so if homeschooling, private schooling, charter schools are more effective in that process, then that would probably necessitate some level of reform of the public school system. But anyway, Scandal Scan, are you aware of RCW 4306220? And I might be, but I don't have it memorized. And HB 1531. I probably am, but I don't have it memorized. You might explain a little bit more because as somebody who's had to watch the legislature for the last 15 years, I've had thousands of bills that I've looked at over the years. And actually what's more confusing is sometimes the bill number, they just recycle the bill numbers. And so it gets really confusing when there was an old bill that was particularly controversial in 2011 and that number kind of bounces around there for a while. And you see the number pop up again and you think they're talking about the old bill. Anyway, so I don't know which one you're talking about there, but it's ironic that we had no Kings protests and our governor's passed laws making him just that. It's scary. Well, our governor didn't pass the laws. The legislators that, if they should be called that, in the House and the Senate, they're the ones who actually passed the laws. The governor signed them and didn't line item veto or veto entirely the bad ones. And I'm assuming you're referring to the one about that. I think this is the one about the COVID, the health department abuses that the bill would encourage. And if so, I'm adamantly opposed to that and the change that the legislature pushed through. So anyway, so I would be trying to repeal that as quick as I could if we had a conservative Republican majority or even just a bare majority in there. Just a sane majority in the legislature, I'd be trying to repeal that. Jason Fisher, question, besides permit to purchase law coming up, what other laws should we look out for and could we see liability insurance mandates and how would this work? Well, I'm assuming you're talking about really the next legislative session because I don't believe the permit to purchase law, which is obviously an illegal law, and they kicked it down the road so far that it'll take years before it's even implemented or they'll even try to implement it. And I'm not sure. I mean, I think I understand the political nature of that. They want to at least get one more election cycle under their belt before they actually implement it. It's the same thing with the unpopular payroll tax that they put in there for the health savings accounts, the scam that they did, and they kicked that down the road as well. Whenever they have an exceptional level of incompetence related to a public policy that's completely going to fail, they do try to kick it out past the next election cycle so that there's no consequences and so that everybody who complained about them or was concerned about them and they cried wolf, by the time that election comes along, it'll look like they cried wolf because, hey, the world hasn't ended, the bill passed. What do you mean? That happened 18 months ago or 2 years ago we passed that, but it hasn't been implemented yet. And so the dire consequences that they're warning about, they come, but they're time delayed. And so the Democrats are doing that because they do have concerns about some of the elections. And so and they're very specifically concerned about 7 ledge districts in the state have the potential to flip Republican, and they just do. Even with all the problems that we've had with the election system, not everybody is a static voter where they decide to pick their place for life and they'll never change their vote. That isn't how most people operate. I mean, that's the reason when I lived in New York City as a student and I saw Giuliani was running for governor or for mayor, I remember thinking, oh, this guy's a Republican. What chance does he have? 15% Republicans in New York City. Come on, there's no way. And I remember they asked me for him to be on his campaign, and I just thought this guy didn't have a chance. I just wanted to come home back to Washington, and then he got elected the next year. And it was a pretty amazing example of a lot of people who decided that they just didn't want to have 2,000 people murdered a year anymore, and they actually wanted somebody to be in charge of the city who was going to clean that up. And shockingly, it's not just that he promised to clean it up, but he genuinely did. And so that's how people have their projected voting things change. It's one of the mistakes that political insiders will make on cultural ossification or fossilization. So just presuming that because you are a Hispanic voter, and Hispanics have traditionally voted for Democrats for years, that because you're Hispanic, they just automatically presume you're going to continue to vote for Democrats moving forward. And as we've seen in the recent Trump election, that's no longer predictable, because you will have change agents that come along in politics that create a shifting dynamic of how people vote moving forward. And so the Asian vote, which is spread over a number of different subsets and cultures and perspectives in Washington state, is actually a big vote in Western Washington. And that could flip completely to Republican overnight. And the Democrats will probably never see that coming. The Republicans probably won't see it coming. But when things like that happen, or people decide they just don't want to have their kids, they don't want their boys attacked at school and turned into girls secretly and taken away from them, they don't want their girls destroyed, have their girls' aspirations destroyed in sports, they maybe have the archaic belief that maybe the kids should actually learn how to do math before they get out of school, or maybe they have the unusual belief that maybe they should not have crime every single day and lose their car, have it stolen frequently. When these dangerous thoughts come in their heads, for some reason those people tend not to vote Democrat anymore, since the Democrats seem to advocate policies that produce those kind of negative results. So we'll see. Jerry Pyatt, what do you really think? What do you think really happened at I'm assuming you're saying the World Trade Center? Somebody covering that story said that video was doctored and that the planes were not the real cause of it, when the original video shows the plane. Well, Jerry, planes did hit the World Trade Center. I wasn't in New York City witnessing it myself. I had a bunch of friends that were there who did witness it themselves. I used to do tours atop the World Trade Center when I was at Columbia as a student. I was on the cross-country track team, and so what would happen is so what happened, I could drive the vans. I had a key to one of the school vans, and I was comfortable driving in New York City at the time, which is very different than driving here, by the way. Or used to be in particular. But they would have these parents and their kids would come, and they're considering looking at Columbia. And so the coach, they don't give athletic scholarships, so the coach would oftentimes on the track team or the cross-country team would say, hey, listen, these prospective students, can you go out and show them around the city and convince them that coming to New York is a great idea? And so one of the ways of doing that is you would take them on kind of a tour of the city, and usually these kids are from the Midwest or West Coast or somewhere long ways away from New York City. This is their opportunity to get a first-hand guided tour, which I did for years there, actually. And I would oftentimes drive down. I usually wouldn't take the subway for good reason back then. I would drive down to South Street Seaport or somewhere down there by the World Trade Center and, get a bagel at South Street Seaport, walk on Wall Street, and then go to the top of the World Trade Center, because that was a great thing to do as a tourist in New York City at the time. And so I had been at the top of the World Trade Center many, many times. I have no idea how many times, but it was a lot. And so to somebody who saw them for 4 years and actually went up them a lot, I remember I brought my grandma back in the 90s to take her to the top, and other friends of mine over the years I took to New York and would give them a tour since I was familiar with it, and which is unusual for somebody who grew up in the Pacific Northwest. and then watching the planes hit that day was a pretty big deal. There's a lot of dumb theories that just are not real out there that people have. There are, and listen, I don't put it beyond the government to be incompetent and stupid. I don't think that you're going to get a few thousand people colluding together to conceal, or a few 100,000 conceal and adequately conceal the truth from the public. So those planes did hit. Now, the bigger question is, as it relates to the guys that took the planes and flew them into the World Trade Center, did the government have a decent idea that these were bad guys and they shouldn't have been in our country anymore? Because there's been plenty of research done on that shows that they should have known that and not let them stay here. So, I think sometimes people are missing the bigger story, which is oftentimes that our country frequently lets some of the worst people in and doesn't bother to get rid of them, which is one thing I'm very supportive of, the deportation efforts of the Trump administration. I think they have to get rid of a lot of these people. It doesn't mean, and they do need to fix the immigration system, but to have a controlled process where we're really getting good people that we want to have in the country who are productive. They don't want to rape kids. They don't want to run human trafficking operations. They aren't part of the Sinaloa drug cartel. They don't sell drugs. They don't have riots and commit violence, and they don't want to fly airplanes into buildings in our country. I don't think that's too much to ask for people coming to the country, and so that's one of the reasons why I think the deportation efforts that Trump's doing, an attempt to kind of control the border again for the first time, it's very popular. I'm not hardly alone in thinking that, and as time goes by, we will see if that actually, we should see the improvement in some of these issues, but it's going to take a long time. I think they were saying he being Trump is saying he wants to deport 3,000 people a day. That's a steep lift. So we'll have to see how it goes. And obviously, Democrats don't want to deport the criminals. They prefer to have them. The presumption is that anybody who's willing to commit a violent crime must be a Democrat. So, and they certainly vote Democrat, and maybe more than once. So they want to keep as many of those people here. And that's it's one of these political fights that we're in the middle of right now. Thunder Designer, do you actually think Vivek has a actual shot to win the Republican nomination? Well, he would have a shot, but I don't think he will. And so he certainly wouldn't be on the top list that I would think of for a 2028 run for president. NinjaBot, do you think we can get enough evidence together to put Washington politicians on Kash Patel's radar? I've been doing everything I can to get big names to look at what's happening here. And the answer to that is yes. And the question is, what kind of evidence? Saying that you don't like them isn't going to generate the kind of attention that you would want for them to investigate anybody. Saying that you don't like how they vote isn't going to convince them to come and investigate anybody. Saying that they're clowns, idiots, and goofballs, well, there's so many people like that in government today that the prisons in America aren't big enough to hold them all. So you're not going to have that kind of investigation. What they're really going to be looking for is open and outright fraud and grifting, and that's usually the kind of thing that they're willing to investigate. And so I think you can dig up information that would encourage them to come after people, but you don't necessarily have the ability to pick somebody and say, that person, I will find that they've committed fraud. You really are a truth seeker. You're looking at whatever the truth is, and so you might be thinking that you're looking at that person, but in their universe, they may actually not have done anything that's that type of illegality anyway, but a bunch of other people related to them you're going to stumble on and find out that those people did commit crimes and they need to go to jail or prison or be investigated to get to that point. And so we'll see. Jason Fisher, question, what's your opinion on citizens wearing body cameras, especially with all the crazy people? Is it worth getting, or are there too many negatives? Well, I'll tell you what, if I was one of the journalists going out and trying to report on Antifa riots, I would be wearing a body camera, and it's probably a really good idea. I'd have one in front and one in back, and I would have it live streaming somewhere so that they can't just steal it off of you after they assault you and attack you, so that at least you're able to document what's going on. Day-to-day life, who wants to live like that? I don't think I'd want to, so I would have that there. People put them on their cars, and it probably comes in handy when you have a car accident, certainly. I mean, there's a whole video world out there on YouTube and TikTok that show all these crash videos, most of which they get off of these dash cam videos. And I know when we had one of our kids starting to drive, I put one of those in there for him just so that he could document if there was a problem or something happened. So fortunately, we never had to really use it, but I think it's handy to have those out there. I just think people have to decide how they want to live their lives, and I don't know that I'd want to have a camera on me 24/7. It's not even really on me, right? When you wear those, you're documenting everybody around you, and that's going to be obnoxious to them too. So it's just one of those issues. It's an interesting question though, but I thought about that with some of the people and some of the videos I've seen recently. And Antifa and the left are going to be increasingly more violent at these events, and so their willingness to be violent is it's like a bottomless pit. So documenting it is probably pretty helpful. And there's a reason why Antifa will always attack everybody that has a camera or they think has a camera out there, because they don't want you to document it. Since a lot of people, this is Michael Case here, since a lot of people have talked about the Iran issue, I saw a map posted the other day of fallout shelters in the area. Are those even maintained anymore? And when you say fallout shelters, I mean, you're talking about fallout shelters in Washington State. That's a great question. I don't think there's a general tendency to maintain fallout shelters in the Pacific Northwest. I went back to do a tour of a school in tornado land with one of my kids not that long ago, and I noticed that they had tornado shelters under a lot of their buildings. And so probably in an environment like that, many of those tornado shelters serve as hurricane shelter, maybe if you're more in the southeast, but those would probably serve that function, right, as kind of a fallout shelter in case something happened. But modern fallout shelters, I don't think they make them anymore, really. You could build one yourself, especially if you're into prepping. You could put one in. I mean, we used to call them, just root cellars, right? I mean, glorified, you could do a much better job than that, but I don't think it's a bad idea if you want to put one in on your place. It's never, all the bunkers out there, the better off you are. One of the little secret sauce knowledge bowl details, in case anybody ever asks you, is what's the highest concentration of private bunkers in Washington State? Probably in America, actually, but it's certainly in Washington. And the answer to that is Thurston. It's eastern Thurston County around Yelm, and a little bit into Pierce and Lewis County, because of the Ramtha School of Enlightenment and J.Z. Knight's channeling the 35,000-year-old American warrior spirit named Ramtha, who, among other things, convinced her followers to build, which was probably the least harmful thing that she convinced them to do, but was to build these undergrounds. They called them undergrounds. They didn't want to call them bunkers, but essentially to prepare for the future potential invasion of the lizard people, line your homes with copper and then build these underground bunkers. And it was kind of prepping before prepping was cool. And there's lots of those that have been built, thousands of them that have been built all over eastern Yelm area and Thurston County, and a little bit in Pierce and Lewis County as well. And, there's no harm in having that on your place. It's kind of cool. So I had a talked to somebody that once bought one of these homes, no idea it was there, and it was somebody who was getting out of the cult, so they sold their place and bailed, and these guys bought it, and they owned the house for 6 months before they suddenly discovered that in one of the little outbuilding sheds, they opened it up, and there were these two massive underground bunkers that had been built years before, and they were pretty cool, so they really enjoyed having those. So I don't think it's a bad idea, we'll see how it goes. The Thunder Designer. Hey, Glenn, I also read an article last week saying that there was supposed to be a fifth plane on September 11th. Lots of people were discussing about it. Your thoughts? Well, I don't know. I mean, there's lots of theories out there right now. Obviously, we had 4 planes go down. I mean, I think in the original, when they found some of the original plans for what was going to be the equivalent of September 11th, there was originally planning, I thought, for 20 planes. And the reason why they narrowed down the number of planes is they didn't think they could have operational security over that many different hijackers, and all it would take for the feds to catch one team or one person and realize something's afoot to probably throw the whole plan out the door. And so I think some of the original plans had a lot more than 4 planes, but 4 is what they ended up with. Let's see, NinjaBot. How do you feel about gun stores and such refusing to follow these insane laws and refusing to pay fines? Do you think with enough backing from locals that it could force some reform? It could be, but I have to tell you, it's a brave thing to do and financially risky thing to do. And most people don't want to stick their neck out, especially if you're running a gun shop, firearms shop. You basically are trying to make money. And You lose the profit motive in selling firearms and supplies with it when you're going to have a $500,000 litigation that you have to fight for 5 years. And it's not so fun to go through that process. Just talk to anybody who's been in court a lot. But for most people, some people are weird and they like going to court. I admit that I don't mind that as much as others, but nevertheless, most people don't. And it's expensive for most people. And so what happens is it's great if they want to defy the statute, but it probably doesn't end up working out well, particularly when you look at the judicial system that we have in our state and the corrupt judges that exist here. Speaking of which, you may see me get involved in some issues with some judicial reform. I'll tell you more about it later. I don't want to give it up too much in advance, but there's a lot more coming on that front, I think, from me. Why would a country, this is graphics guru, like Iran, which is governed by a strict theocratic regime, take longer than expected to develop a nuclear weapon on purpose? And the answer to that is it wasn't on purpose. The truth is that once it became Israel or America and other countries like Saudi Arabia discovered and realized that Iran was pursuing a nuclear weapon, and that's going back a couple decades, there was extensive and repetitive efforts to sabotage the process. It isn't quite as simple as people think, especially if you create a roadmap for yourself that's relatively complex. And so there was a history of, if you remember right, there was some original, I forgot the name of it now. There was a worm that was planted on the centrifuges that were provided to Iran for uranium enrichment that would create this hardware failure that would spin them up and explode them. And so that was a big problem that delayed them probably close to a decade. They had sabotage occur frequently that would cause them to, and even assassination of some of their senior nuclear scientists. And so it takes a while. And I think largely that was probably one of the biggest things that really held them up. They also at times had financial setbacks, particularly in the first Trump administration when the financial squeeze that got put on them at that point in time really probably reduced how much money that they could spend for those, especially 3 years there, until the Biden administration got in and they had a lot of the restrictions were lifted from Iran. And so it's not as easy as people think, especially when you're simultaneously developing an intercontinental ballistic missile program and you're funding expensive proxy terrorist operations like Hezbollah and Hamas around the world. It's just expensive. I mean, you're really running a pretty fancy operation there. And of course, you can impoverish your society for a long time. And theocratic regimes like that, just like socialist regimes or communist regimes, they're pretty good at impoverishing their population, but eventually you kind of have to throw a little bit of bread to the people. So I just don't think it was as simple as people originally thought as they went along. And they didn't want to have a one-and-done operation. They really wanted to have it be a little bit better than that. And that was probably their undoing at times because that allowed people, I'm assuming that there was some American involvement in that, but probably most of that was Israeli as they were shutting it down. Remember, it was Israel that in 1981 flew their planes and bombed the nuclear reactor that Iraq was running at the time. It was during the Reagan administration because they were very concerned about Iraq getting nukes. And if you remember, Iraq and Iran had a horrific war that over 1 million people died in, including human wave assaults from Iran for a number of years there. And that conflict lasted for a long time as well. And both of those countries were incentivized to nuke each other if they could get a nuke developed. And I think that was really the beginning of the nuclear programs that would have started in both those countries. But Israel was obviously very concerned about any kind of a development of a nuclear weapon over there. The bigger concern and the most likely place where you could potentially have a nuclear weapon used today is between India and Pakistan. Both countries have nukes. They're both capable of using them. They both kind of developed their nuclear programs in secret. And once they crossed the Rubicon and suddenly had nukes, which wasn't that long ago, and they set them off and developed them, now there's an uneasy concern. And I remember I did take a class in college that was led by a couple of good professors actually in school, and one of them, he was the one who had orchestrated a lot of the nuclear planning and programs during the Reagan administration. And he was a professor of mine, and he had written a lot of books on nuclear gamemanship and all of the other issues that were involved in that process at the time. And he did say that the most predictable future use of a nuclear weapon in anger was the Indian subcontinent. And again, it's scary when you have countries that have the ability to use those weapons, and the inevitable escalation curve that probably occurs when you use them, and they're right next to each other and they hate each other, and that hatred's hard to actually go away. We'll see. The Thunder Designer again, do you think Powell is going to eventually give in and cut rates next month or September? Trump is pressing him hard. He sounds like he changed his tone today. Yeah, I mean, one of the problems, of course, when you have something that's a central planning scheme for interest rates, which is essentially what the Federal Reserve is, they're a political monster regardless of their pretense to be independent or not. I'm sure inevitably he'll end up cutting it. I don't think that's as positive an outcome as people think, because destroying the value of the dollar over time is not necessarily in the best interests of America either. And so it makes it easier to pay off the debt. That's about the only positive thing about that. Otherwise, it just encourages more malinvestment, and it reduces the value of the dollar moving forward. So we'll see. But yes, Trump is pushing him hard, and I understand why. NinjaBot, We the Govern, do you think... Oh, you misspelled it, by the way, so that's why it didn't pop up and stand out to me. Do you think that pushing First, Second, Fourth, and 10th Amendment issues to the Supreme Court could make serious changes here in Washington? The administration here provenly violates all of them. First and Second and Fourth Amendment issues for sure. The 10th is weaker sauce issue. Most likely the Supreme Court doesn't tend to rule on 10th Amendment issues, which is basically all issues, that it basically saying that whatever the feds can't do, the states can do. So but I think First Amendment, Second and Fourth property rights issues are an unappreciated angle of attack on attack on our freedoms and liberties. And I, as a property rights activist for many years, anything that we can do to push restoring the primacy of property rights, which are really necessary for a free society, I think that's a good idea and a good thing to do. So I did go a little bit long again today, so I think I'm going to wrap it up here. So just remember, I do have a video coming out. I think I'm going to launch it tomorrow, maybe Thursday at the latest. If I see you in Silverdale on Thursday at the Doge Training class, lots to talk about there. I'm looking forward to seeing people out there. You've been very eager, and I've been getting a lot of emails about people who want to come to that class. And there's just a lot of things that are going on right now, a lot of good stuff. I'm anticipating doing quite a bit of work to push some more video and some different types of video forward as best I can. I'm in a transition process right now. We're trying to get a closer studio set up that I can do a lot more video production at, and we'll see how well that works. But in the meantime, I am bouncing all around the state as I always have, and a good chance I'll see you out there somewhere around Washington State, if not this summer, then this fall. But there's a lot going on. There's a lot of races going on right now for school board, city council races, very important races in the long run, and it's worth paying attention to what's happening in your community. And if you haven't looked at the books of your local school district, or your city council, your county commission, or your fire district, or your conservation district, I'd encourage you to do so. Teaching people how to do this in the Doge Training class, I think it's going to produce good results. Maybe not so good for the corrupt and for the people who are stealing money, but for the rest of us, it's a good thing. And I think exposing that truth is an important first step. So with that, guys, thank you so much for staying on. Sorry I went a lot longer than I had realized. So, and I hope you have a good week. Enjoy the next video. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you are watching this video and it is not Tuesday evening, then you have to post your question down in the comment section. I will do my best to answer it there as well. And with that, thank you guys so much. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next week. I think is Monday. I'll be seeing you next Monday at 5:30. That's the plan. Hope all's well. Talk to you then.